What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Flow Lab Collab. My name is John, and this is our laboratory and our playground.
My name is Kat Carter. Welcome to the Flow Show. So, John, what is flow?
Hmm. Well, flow is kind of a universal term that almost everybody seems to relate to on some level. But the way that I relate to it is a sense of selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. So it's an experience where I am, or I'm not even in it almost. It's as if the me steps aside and out of the way, and what I'm experiencing, I am completely melding with. Um, that, sense of what I'm doing is who I am, where my action and awareness are merging, and it's just full absorption in the present moment and what I'm doing in that moment. And so for right now, it's my conversation with you.
Cool. I was going to say, can you give me some examples of your favorite ways to get into flow?
Yeah, so my favorite flow activities, eh, I've been notorious for seeking out high adrenaline, high stakes activities like snowboarding, mountain biking, rock climbing, and kayaking, and things that really, really force me into the present. Because if I'm not, then I'm going to mess up and get hurt. And those high stakes activities are, what you could look at as flow primers, where just because you are engaging in it with it, it's forcing you, it's priming you, it's fully, requiring you to enter into a flow state. So for me, it's moving my body, but I'm learning to expand that into music, into art, into every other aspect of my life, even work. At a computer is often uh, really difficult, but if I can get into a flow state, then I am immersed in it and time flies. So, yeah, flow is everything. It's peak performance. It's a peak experience. It is my favorite state of consciousness. And what about you, Kat? What does flow mean for you?
I think I was first introduced to the flow concept by you and what you've been doing with the Flow Lab collab and hosting Flow Labs. And flow for me really is movement based. That's where I find the most flow, particularly in my life. I teach yoga. So when I'm practicing yoga, I feel like I'm in a flow state. When I'm teaching, that also feels like flow to me. And I've been interested in all of the different ways I can apply this to different areas in my life, whether it's, taking a walk with my dog or designing a website. There are different areas that need to have certain levels of concentration, and flow is such a beautiful way to experience that.
Hmm. So I've heard the saying flow follows focus, and you're talking about concentration.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious when you feel you are in flow the most or the most focused.
Mm-hmm.
Is that during your yoga practice, or are there other activities that bring you into that state?
I would say anything that requires my full creative attention. So that also applies to when I'm doing web design and I need to really be focused on visualizing what a site looks like. So being able to bring myself into a place where I can focus and create at the same time is this like very delicate balance, right? I think we've talked a little bit about flow and how it impacts our ability to bring a level of discipline and then also a level of surrender into the experience, which is really where flow comes from, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, again, there's so many ways to slice it and dice it to understand it. Everyone seems to relate to it slightly differently, but definitely right now, there's some really cool findings coming out in psychology. In fact, flow, as I know it, comes from psychology. A Hungarian gentleman by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, if I'm saying that correctly, who unfortunately just passed away this last year, but left behind mountains of research on what he calls the optimal experience. And he came to these conclusions by interviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are some of the happiest people and who live a life of passion and purpose. And he found that most of them described their experience as fluidly moving from one to the next and flowing effortlessly and everything just coming with ease and grace. And so he actually came up with 8 or 9 characteristics of flow. So that's where a lot of the descriptive terminology that we are using comes from. But I believe what you're referring to with that balance between discipline and surrender um, has a lot of his work in it, but also has a lot of more of the Eastern philosophies, some more Zen or like Taoism in it, where it is surrendering to the moment and to the what's right in front of you. You know, it's becoming the river, so to speak, right? And that's surrender.
Mm.
And so I do believe it's the perfect harmony between discipline and surrender. And the discipline is, sort of the what can we do to get into flow, to stay in flow, to live a life full of flow. And the surrender is to just let go and go with the flow. But that is always easier said than done, of course.
Of course. I think surrender is such a beautiful piece of this puzzle. And music, as you mentioned earlier, you said you were getting more into music, is a really helpful tool for helping us do that. I lead a static dance, and it's all about surrender and surrendering to a beat, the beat of the music, the beat of your heart and your body, and what can happen when you fully let go to that, succumb to that, even. And you can also experience flow that way, in a way that feels completely, as you said, immersed when you're immersed in something.
hmm And it's really interesting because it's very paradoxical and contradictory in that sense. So, for instance, dance and music, absolutely surrender seems to be the main ingredient. But when it comes to downhill mountain biking, surrender would be a really bad decision. You have to fight. You have to fight to stay on your bike, to stay upright, to go at, you know, harebrained speeds down a mountain and survive that with precision and perfection in a way, as far as like some of the athletes that we're seeing nowadays, right?
Mhm.
So you have like action and adventure sport athletes on one hand who are pushing the envelope and kind of creating uh, this feeling of ultimate human performance of like, look at what we can achieve with human performance. And at the other end of it is surrender.
Surrender. And watching even like a musician just be in total flow with their instruments and create in from this place that just looks like they're lost somewhere else. It's so beautiful to observe and then so beautiful to then also participate in ourselves.
hmm Well, this sort of paradox is kind of how we ended up here with seemingly two different things. We have the Flow Performance Lab on one hand, which is all about performance, peak performance, ultimate human performance, or just feeling and performing your best. And then on the other hand, we have the collab, which is all about consciousness optimization, which is not directly necessarily performance. It's about really getting into a state of consciousness where we are expanded, more creative, more aware, and feeling our best. It's sort of like our highest selves, you could say. So in a more spiritual sense. And so we kind of ended up with these two different ideas or concepts, and now we're really doubling down because they are absolutely complementary. It's the discipline and the surrender in a sense. So I really do enjoy these discussions, and I'm really looking forward to having more people on the podcast, some really interesting friends with some awesome experience to share and wisdom to share with us. So, this is our first episode. We're going to explain a lot more about what we're doing here. But from this point on, we're going to bring on guests and we're going to start to dig into what they do to get into flow. What are their flow hacks, their flow practices, and things like that. But I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what you do on a daily basis to harness flow.
Sure. I think one of the main ingredients is time. Flow can't be rushed, and giving ourselves enough time to experience that, whether it be in a meditation. That's something that I do every morning. We've been doing every morning is sitting down and meditating or doing breath work and really dedicating adequate time and space so it doesn't feel rushed. You can't rush creativity, just like you can't box chaos. It can't be fit into a little piece. So, on a daily basis, looking at where I have spaces in my schedule, or which I've really been doing now, is creating a schedule based around flow, where I have full days where I'm not designated to be somewhere at a certain time. I know that I need time in my creative projects. I would consider what this podcast is even being a creative project, and giving ourselves enough space to get into flow state where we can have open and honest conversations that don't feel forced. Or if I know I've got a website to design that day, giving myself enough time where I take care of my self care first. And then if I feel like I'm in what we would refer to as struggle or friction, where things just aren't flowing, they're not working, I'm feeling like tension in my body, knowing what tools I have in my toolbox to release myself into a place where I can create from. So, one of those for me would be something like going on a walk.
Hmm.
That helps really release tension for me. So I know that's a tool that I have. How about
Hmm.
you? What kind of tools you got?
Well, I've sort of started to categorize them a bit more, so that my brain can start to make sense of it. But yeah, I have my five favorites: movement, music, meditation, mindset, and medicine. And when I say medicine, I'm referring to the foods I eat, supplementation, and even working with plant medicine or psychedelics. So I have those as my main go tos, but I'm adamantly trying to experiment and find more. I'm convinced that if I just stuck with those five, I would end up boxing myself in and limiting myself. And I want to do the opposite. I want to be unlimited and unleash my fullest potential into the world. Watch out. But yeah, everyone seems to have different tools, techniques, practices, rituals, right? And I call that a flow formula. And again, this is my brain trying to dissect and categorize and understand things. But a lot of us have things that we do that we don't even realize that help us get into a place of coherence, harmony, synchronizing, especially in a group, and to make a team, really come together and cohesive. It has to be in flow. And in fact, you know, you could almost say that every major athletic or even musical performance or masterpiece came out of a flow state, whether that was individual or group. And we really, you know, can look at it that way, and that we can get into these individual flow states ourselves by, you know, practicing and priming. And you're talking about going from struggle and friction to release, step out of your own way in a sense, and then drop into flow,
Mhm.
right? And there's actually one more phase. There's a whole cycle here, and that last phase is recovery. And it's definitely the area I think most of us neglect. But we've started to um, differentiate these a little bit, and so that you can understand where you're at in the flow cycle, and how to move through it more fluidly. So we just talked about, what are our favorite techniques to get into flow, and we call these primers. Some people refer to them as flow triggers. Um, we try not to call them triggers because triggers often feels like an emotional trigger,
Yeah.
that would trigger trauma, and that's fine too. But we're definitely talking about something different here. So we call them primers, and that priming is a process that prepares us to enter flow. But on the backside of that is recovery, and a lot of people struggle with recovery, and that's why recovery feels like the struggle phase. In fact, and sometimes when I am stuck in struggle, I go, "Wait a minute, have I been recovering? Oh, no, I need to get better sleep. I need to drink more water. I need to take care of myself
Even
more."
taking a break.
Taking a break, yeah,
Yeah.
recovering from that specific moment, that specific flow state that you were just in, stepping back, recovering so that you can cycle through again. Yeah, in a more uh, fluid way, I suppose. But I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about what you do on a regular basis, because we've spent a lot of time experimenting and exploring a lot of these practices and even rituals, you could say, that a lot of people use, whether that be performance practices in a Western sort of way, or more religious rituals in a more philosophical or even Eastern way, right? So this East meets West. And I'm curious how you bridge that gap.
I think on a daily basis, having myself open to the greater flow of the universe is super important. And you can have this very zoomed in approach of specific chunks of the day where I'm experiencing flow, whether it be teaching a yoga class or walking my dog or, you know, other things that bring me joy. But when you look at it from a zoom out approach and saying, how can I live my whole life in flow? We've talked a little bit about how we're not sure if it's possible to live in a flow state all day, every day. You've experimented a little bit with this.
I still am.
And that's kind of the point of this podcast too, is like where else can we go with it? But from a really macro level, saying how can I live in the flow, which is you know, what Taoism is finding that sweet spot where the universe is in collaboration with your higher self, and your higher self is in collaboration with the universe to bring you the most amount of joy, happiness, and peace in your life. Because the opposite of that is not feeling those ways, which is why we have those for contrast. But really looking to see how I can flow through my day with an intention, which I set every morning. So that is something I do every day. Every morning I meditate and then I set my intention with the lens of how I'm going to look at my day. And if I can start to filter things through that lens, it immediately allows me to create awareness, which is one of the key ingredients in flow, is being aware of the present moment and not being fixated on the past or the future, but the now.
Hmm.
And I'm curious for you what you're doing on a daily basis to find flow.
Hmm. Yeah, I I feel like when you really try to like break it down into what are you doing in your day? That alone is an awareness practice. Like that brings a lot of awareness to where you might be losing energy and stuff like that. So for me, it is tuning in right away before I drink my coffee. In fact, I found that if I immediately start my day with coffee, then I'm missing out on almost the baseline consciousness that I wake up with, right? Uncaffeinated, uh, very like raw me.
Porous.
Yeah, in the morning. And it's not always fun. And often you're like ready to drink coffee because you want to get back to what you think you are normally, with your caffeinated version of yourself. But that's another state of consciousness, right?
Alert, awake, John.
Like, I love alert awake John, right? Like right now. But the reality is that when you wake up, that's your baseline. Um, and unless you wake up like hungover or something, of course. But if you wake up and you're awake at, in the morning, that is your baseline. And you should spend some time there. I believe we should definitely spend some time getting to know ourselves, our sober selves, and do some, work there. And so that work for me is meditation. And even though I hate to use the word work, I believe it's important to put in the work. But how can I make it more fun and playful? And so I'm constantly experimenting with these practices. And even though meditation is one of my main methods, right, that I said earlier, I am always experimenting with what other ways can we meditate. I really don't like doing the same meditation every single day. I believe that leads to, um, sort of the law of diminishing returns. So it's got to be fresh, it's got to be novel. And then, yeah, start to stack different practices or primers into my morning and make that my morning routine or ritual. So, bulletproof coffee is always a go to. And again, that's after I chug water. And I used to chug salt water to really, really try to hydrate in the morning. But yeah, then drinking some bulletproof coffee, which is loaded with fats, healthy fats from grass-fed butter and MCT oil and some cinnamon and cayenne, and I drink that, and that wakes me up like no other, and it doesn't feel like a normal cup of coffee. I mean, like I said, it's loaded with fat, which helps the caffeine fully saturate and slows that process down. And then my next go-to is reading. If I don't read right away, then I'm not going to read that day typically because that's when my brain just got cranked to the max, and from that moment I can absorb and I can sit with it all. And I've really started to bring journaling more and more into my life, even though I struggle with it, but reading and writing first thing in the morning are some of my favorite flow practices to get the flow of thoughts going. Because if I wake up with stuck thoughts, they got to have somewhere to go, right?
Do you ever feel like if you don't find flow early in the morning, you struggle to find it later in the day? Or does it feel, tell me more.
Yes and no. The morning is where it's at. If I set my morning up, often I can drop into flow and be in flow the whole day, or at least, for what feels like a major, major chunk of my day. And if I don't, that's okay too, because I've started to really look at my practices, my discipline, as something to play with and experiment with. And that's really why I call this a lab, and this is the laboratory. This is where I can experiment freely. And so I'm always doing that. And I bring play into my life fully. And so, yes, even in moments of friction and struggle, I'm looking for opportunities to play and have a more playful mindset and see how I can think of things differently. And so that'll often lead to flow at some point in the day. But on really difficult days, on really like days that I can't seem to get out of a rut, I have to move. I have to fatigue my body. I have to get the what feels like stuck energy or resistance to the world around me to move, to shift. And, that can be done physically. You can really fatigue yourself out of it almost in a way. And so when life gets me down, I work out harder than I ever do in the rest of my life. I really hit it hard, and that often brings me back to sort of homeostasis or that baseline where I can be like, okay, I'm here. Now I can start to take steps to get back into the flow cycle and out of the struggle phase because it's so, oh, it's hard to be there. But I truly feel that without friction, flow wouldn't have any flavor, right? What makes flow feel so good is that the opposite of it feels so horrible.
We have to have the
We
contrast.
have to have contrasts. And that's why I do see this as yin and yang, right? Discipline, surrender. And I think that we can each find that for ourselves through self experimentation, exploration, play. I think these are the main components of what we're doing here. And it certainly drives me. I feel like the wellness world, the health industry has reached its max right now as far as keeping people motivated and moving forward. Um, and that's because it's not fun, it's not playful enough. And our most intrinsic driver is fun and play. And if we get back to having fun, then often we can find that all of the things that we know are good for us, but so hard to stick with, become a lot more fun. And you can kind of reach into that toolbox and grab whatever and even make something new by combining a couple different practices together. So we call that stacking. And I would love to know how you stack some of these in your life.
Oh boy. Um, Stacking is a cool concept. I think to describe it, it just involves taking different elements where you might find yourself in flow or different tools that you might find helpful to you, such as an audio tool, such as a drum. Drumming or beat is a nice tool to help your brain go somewhere else, so to speak. Be able to entrain your brain actually to a certain rhythm. So, drumming is something that I've started to bring into my own personal practice and also into my yoga classes. I drum at the end,
So you're stacking drumming on with yoga
stacking drumming and yoga and dancing too.
and dancing
And
in your
dancing
yoga
in
class.
my yoga class. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So people are not just stuck on a mat?
This is correct. I have started to really allow my students to experiment more, and I invite them during most of my classes to step off their mat for a moment, which is so liberating, especially when we're outside. It's so
Mm.
liberating to step in the grass. It's so liberating to let yourself move in a way that feels authentic to you. This is the discipline and the surrender of yoga, right? So there's these disciplined postures that we practice in a certain way that have to be done, with a certain breath and a certain technique. And there's a respect to that lineage, yes. And there's a reason for discipline, of course. But then there's a beautiful reason to take your body into a different plane than it has been today, like reaching your arm up or, kicking your foot out at a weird direction. There's so many benefits for your skeleton, for your fascia and for your brain to go to take your body in a different movement pattern than it has been. And what people are looking for when they come to the mat varies person to person. But I know my job is to provide them with some sort of movement that helps them feel better or feel different, at least, than when they walked into this space. So I found that stacking these different techniques of dancing and drumming and yoga creates an experience unlike anything that they've had before. And I'm curious how you stack or what you've been getting into stacking wise.
Well, a wonderful phrase just came to me. Stacking is hacking.
Ooh, me gusta.
Yeah, yeah.
See.
So, this idea of stacking and hacking came from biohacking. Absolutely. This is a very Western way of looking at hacking into our biology, upgrading, optimizing, all of that fun stuff. So, that's really how I got introduced to this, was by hacking my biology. And coming from the fitness world, it's a no-brainer to supplement to get fitness gains, right? And so you can really easily apply that to supplementing for your brain or your immunity. But yeah, that's a lot of stacking. You stack your supplements. So different supplements are often synergistic and work better together. Apparently, up until only like six, though, I think. After that, your body is going to excrete a lot of them. You're peeing out money.
Can't handle it.
Anyways, so I didn't know that. I just went hard with experimenting with stacking anything and everything I could, right? And so from fitness, that led me into biohacking, which actually led me more and more into like massage therapy and different therapies that I can do. And you can actually stack therapies as well.
Hmm.
And so what I've started to do is have somebody on my massage table who is under red lights, so using red and near infrared light therapy while they're on the table. And I've also installed some speakers into the underneath my table so that I can pump in some healing frequencies through their body at the same time. And then when I flip them over, I will put them on an audiovisual entrainment device, which is these awesome glasses and headphones that strobe and put in binaural beats to entrain the brain to a specific frequency. And the frequency I'm doing is much slower to slow the brain down, which massage already does on its own, but you're adding in these different layers of technology and technique. And that to me is the next like forefront of what we can do. Like that's a whole nother world that we can get into because so many people specialize and get really good at one or two things. But very few people look at all of the things and go, what can I plug and play here? And that to me is like that's where it's at. That's what gets me up and just so stoked every day is to play with these different practices that wouldn't necessarily you wouldn't think would complement, but then when you experience them, you're like, oh my God, massage is so much better. When I use uh, a device alongside of it, right? And that device could even be something like CBD mixed in with your oil, right? Or sound, right? If you can have actual sound forks, tuning forks, and like we experienced yesterday
Mm-hmm.
with our friend Marianne, putting them on our bodies, and you can feel the vibration go through you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these, it's like infinite, and we limit a lot of it because we just are unsure most of the time, and we don't know, and so we're afraid. We're like paralyzed. It's like paralysis by analysis.
Mm.
And so to experiment is very freeing to go, wait a minute, these are all man-made, and I'm a human at the forefront of all the humans who have invented all this stuff. Why couldn't I combine things and create things? Of course we can. It's so empowering. And so, that's what I feel is my purpose on this planet is to really get people stoked to play and experiment and explore with their consciousness, you know? And that's a tough one because most people are sort of stuck in beta brainwaves.
Well, we had a chance to experience this with a bunch of other people who wanted to play. In February, we ran a Flow Lab collab,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a really cool experience to collaborate and hear what other people wanted to either offer to the group as ways that they found flow in their lives, or other stacking tools. That was really cool that people brought different supplements that they were taking. We tried Kana,
Mm-hmm. A root, I
a root.
believe.
Yeah, it's a root,
Mm-hmm.
which was supposed to bring a very playful, like, enhancement to the day. And
Mm-hmm.
that day was really magical, honestly, as a
Yeah.
group.
It's very elevating. Like elevates the mood, stimulates, like wakes you up.
Yeah,
Like wakes up the better part of you, I feel like.
yeah,
And yeah, that experience was amazing. Can you share a little bit more about your experience during that specific Flow Lab collab?
totally. Yeah, it was, we all got together for a week in Costa Rica with the intention of getting into group flow, with the intention of flowing together. So, yes, taking our individual practices and what we did, but then also coming up with a lot of games that we could play. One of my favorite things that we did was we played improv games, and those really took our group to another level communication wise, I felt like, and flow wise. And we
Mm-hmm.
we selected those specifically based on conversations that we had before we even met in February, which is one of my favorite things that you brought to the table, was having us meet on Zoom 5 weeks ahead of time to collaborate, to congeal, I would say, maybe what we wanted to get out of the experience, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. And even when we got there, we started right off the bat with setting intentions.
Yeah.
So even though we had pretty good intentions going in, once we arrived there, we really spent time writing down everything we wanted to get out of it on sticky notes and sticking them on a mirror and looking at them and talking about them. I do believe intention is the first part of a very simple equation, simple to say, but hard to do, and that's intention plus action equals manifestation in a way, you know?
Which is something I fought you on, because I'm just like, I put it out to the universe and now I just sit back and wait
And
and
visualize.
visualize. And yes, sometimes it pans out, but really it is the action that takes us into this next level of achieving whatever goal that we want to achieve.
Well, it's discipline and surrender.
It
Once
is.
again, we can always go back to discipline and surrender. I love that so much for that. But yeah, it's the specific Flow Lab in February was an experiment in collaboration with other people who have other flow formulas, who have other flow practices than us, who can offer those to the group. And so, even though we met ahead of time on Zoom and got to know each other and had plenty of time to discuss and play, once we arrived there, it was like back to the drawing board. Like, what are we gonna do for a week?
We had a list. We had a list of all the things that we had talked about doing before, and then we kind of plug and played. We would say, okay, Wim Hof, we want to do that. We want to do cold exposure therapy. We should go to the river. We want to get into word game flow. So we should play one of these improv games that we came up with. And I think that was really cool, the way that the whole week was unstructured. You mentioned the term when we were planning it, unconference, which is like apparently a new kind of conference.
It's an unconventional conference,
Mm,
or unconference for short.
yeah.
And yeah, it's where a bunch of people decide they want to get together with other amazing people and learn from each other. So a lot of times at conferences, it's so structured, and you end up sitting in these conference rooms trying to take notes and learn, and you're getting more and more tired, and your brain starts to wander, and you're not really there until the break. Then break time comes, And then all of a sudden you're back and
We love the break.
and we love it. You're talking with each other and you're meeting new people. And then the leaders of the conference go, all right, guys, time to come back. Next workshop begins, and no one's coming back.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
herding cats.
because, and I think this is one of the key pieces, is because there's a hierarchy at conferences where there are the speakers and then there are the participators or the people in the audience.
Hmm.
And this unconference is everyone's on the same playing field. There is no expert. We are all here to
Hmm.
offer what we have, and no one's in charge, which comes with its own host of things to navigate,
Right.
such as if no one is in charge, who is in charge of getting everyone from point A to point B, which is if we're
Or
meeting in a
who's setting point B? What
right,
is point B? We don't
right.
even know. So it can feel chaotic, right?
Mm-hmm,
It's a very it's really good for learning, especially for people who have a hard time letting go of needing a sense of control, right? For their own psychological safety, they have to feel like there are parameters.
mm-hmm,
And when you just get people together and you give them a blank piece of paper and say, "What do you want to do?" People freeze, and some
mm-hmm,
people get frustrated because they're like, "Well, I didn't pay to have to come up with this." And
mm-hmm.
it's like, well, but this is the first and the only thing we're doing actually is experimenting together with what we can co-create. If equal participation is one of the main group flow primers. And so we really started to bring those group flow primers in and play with them in any sort of way that felt right in the moment without having to set it in stone and make sure that it was all, um, you know, perfectly aligned. It was quite chaotic at times,
It,
but
we found flow.
we found
We
flow.
found a lot of flow actually, and we did come up with a concept of the instigator, which if there's something that some person feels very driven to offer or wants to do, then it becomes upon them to instigate the activity,
Or initiate.
initiate. Like I'm gonna go do Wim Hof in the cold water. I'm gonna go do that in 15 minutes. Anyone who wants to do that with me, meet me at this spot,
Hmm.
and then we go.
But always an open invite.
Always an open invite.
Because this was an experience to create cohesion, harmony, synergy, and sync up. And when you do this well, apparently you can reach levels of group flow that are known as group genius. And that's like the jazz musicians who just shatter everyone's reality because of the things that are coming out of their instruments, right? The things they're doing on stage. You're just like they're riffing off each other, they're going off each other. So musicians do this a lot when they jam. Jazz musicians seem to be the ones who have like set the bar for group genius, but it happens with teams who are innovating. You have sort of incubation or innovation labs, right, that are specifically set up to help people brainstorm and come up with innovative ideas and solutions. And the reality is, though, that it has to be a bit unstructured for creativity to flow. You have to open up to the far flung ideas and the things that don't really make sense, but you're kind of going with them because you're like, well, the whole idea is to go with it, so I'll go with it. And then before long, you're like, wait a minute, I'm getting into this. There is no me anymore, and there's no us anymore. We are one.
The one.
The one. And that's straight up group genius. And so we experienced that. And it wasn't actually till we all left, went back to our homes, but we continued to meet on Zoom because the idea was again to continue the connection, to keep it alive, to keep it there for a little while. And so we continued to meet on Zoom. And what we found was we all had so many ideas for how to prime
Mm-hmm.
and get into flow and also how to unwind and recover that we ended up with a whole list. And that list is currently becoming a card game that we can play. that we can pull cards from and try it out, see if it works, or pull multiple cards and stack them and see how they feel, right? So that was the innovation from February's Flow Lab collab, was a card game that is now in the works, and
So magical.
we're working on the prototype now. And this is truly something we want to produce so that we can invite other people to come play it and add to it, and and literally collaborate and innovate and continue to keep that going. There's no reason it should end just because a group of us has left, you know, the
Physically together.
right.
Cards for humanity.
There we
They're
go.
for humanity.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like making it fun. Back to what you said about how can we make all of these things fun? We know meditation's good for us. We know taking care of our bodies and self-care is good for us. Then why don't we do it more? What is trumping that? And how, or is it fun? Is it, you know, checking our phones and receiving stimulation that way? What's the stimulation that we're receiving? Can we dopamine? Can we redirect that so we make self-care and taking care of our bodies and our minds and our spirits and our hearts more pleasurable?
Mm, yes, I think we can.
I think so too.
I certainly am having a lot more fun with all of this than I was at the beginning. You know, when I first got into it, it was a drag. It was forcing it, you know. Fitness doesn't come easy, and you force fitness for a long time before it feels good and you go back for more because it feels good.
I would say the same is true with meditation.
Mm,
You have to sit. You have to make yourself sit down and
mm,
stop and take your focus away for a second from the external, really bring it in, and know that meditation is a discipline, but it also has so many benefits to it that you may not feel right away or right off the bat, but you have to put in the work, as we call it, of just getting yourself to sit down sometimes is like the piece of the puzzle that is hard for a lot of us to do because as a mother, my daughter's, when she wakes up, is like, hey, let's go, let's go. And if I don't make the time in my day to focus on myself and my meditation practice, then I get pulled into her flow or your flow. Or if I walk into my yoga class, my yoga students' flow, you gotta, mind your flow, stay in your lane, so to speak, but also allow, whatever you are here to share and whatever you have to share with the world to impact others in a way that brings them hopefully more flow, more love, more joy.
mm. Well, I think that's why purpose is so important, you know, to have a north point to always be aligned with and aiming at, and knowing every single day that you wake up that you will work towards, you know, achieving your purpose in life. And when you don't have that, it's difficult. You know, that's, I think, everyone in their early 20s. It certainly was for me, which is why I sought so much pleasure. Um, and that's why they, you know, the saying is follow your bliss. Well, in your early 20s, your bliss is pleasure. And maybe maybe most of your life actually. Bliss is dopamine, is serotonin. It feels really good in the moment, but it often leaves you lower, right? So that's pleasure. But purpose, you know, is really difficult at times, and requires resilience and you know, continued effort over a long period of time. I think that's what's called grit. And you know, every single day, even if you don't feel it that day, you're like, no, I'm working towards my purpose in life. So I do believe moving from pleasure to purpose is how we can go from being a flow junkie to a life full of flow, you know, and really a more balanced life full of flow, and not just one where it's sporadic, or you're, you know, doing unhealthy or risky behaviors to get there, but rather it's much more, um, yeah, natural, organic, so to
Innately
speak.
rewarding.
And oh yeah, intrinsically, innately rewarding, absolutely. So I think that most of our intrinsic drivers are key evolutionary biological drivers. They are instincts, right?
Primal things.
Very primal. And I think when we go back to those, they're free, accessible. Everyone has access, equal access. And they become the knobs and the levers that we can tweak and adjust to tune our senses and tune our awareness and get more meaning out of life. And so, yeah, some of those would be breathing, which is why we keep bringing meditation up, and breath work, like Wim Hof. Eating, sleeping, but eating being what I consider medicine, right? Whatever goes in your body is either a medicine or a poison.
You are
Uh,
what you eat.
yeah, exactly. And sleeping, so that's kind of recovery, but getting into a deep, relaxed place, right? Creating, so an instinct is to create very much. That's why we procreate, I believe. But to create anything is instinctual. Just the act of creating is so intrinsically rewarding. We go back over and over and over, even if we're creating a bunch of junk, it doesn't matter.
I saw a meme somewhere that said, create 3 things for every 1 thing you consume,
Ah, well,
which would be so hard. It's so
it's
hard
very hard, but
to
it
do.
also sounds like it could cause more problems,
This is true.
right? Because creating in itself is expensive as far as resources go.
Would you consider those resources physical or resources more like time and energy?
Both.
Mm.
But either way, the act of creating is so rewarding. And it's why, when we talk about flow, it's one of our favorite outcomes is creativity,
Hmm.
right? But those are instinctual. And then my absolute favorite instinct of all is the instinct to play. We all have it within us. We all grew up with it. Every mammal on this planet plays, and we lose that. We lose sight of that when we grow up and have adult, real world responsibilities. But even in those serious adult responsibilities is actually a lot of play. We're finding. I just read today a book called Homo Ludens, the ape that plays, and it really compared play to like an actual play on stage, and that play is playing out in all of our lives, all of our adult lives, all the time, in the form of religion, organized religion, and ritual. And whether that's religious or not, the ritual of the businessman putting on a suit and tie, that's a costume.
It really is.
that says to him it's time to be a businessman, right? We
And
have all these hats that we wear. These
we're
are
going to talk about official things at this time
going
because
to be
I'm wearing this suit.
super serious with it.
But
It's a board meeting, so everyone needs to be bored.
but if I'm wearing shorts and a polo, I'm drinking a beer with you. It's a different setting, therefore the rules are different, and maybe we're talking about not business stuff.
Exactly. So these are all plays. We're always playing. It's the our awareness of it. Are you aware that your rituals that you hold so near and dear to your value system and your morals, are you aware that those are all make believe?
I think that would freak a lot of people out.
Oh my God. People wouldn't do well.
Because it's our identity, right? We've
Yes.
built this identity around being whatever it is. Even you could argue this is my identity right now. Like
Hmm.
wearing flowy Bali fabrics makes me more worldly and ethereal. Like, no, but it's our identity. We become attached to our stories and our objects and our things that society also gives to us to mold into. Like
The mold,
the mold.
the old cookie cutter.
This is all about what stepping off the mat is about. Break the mold.
Break the mold.
Liberate.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why this is a lab. Because in a lab, you can break shit. And it's okay. It is okay to fail in experimentation. it's one of the only times in society and culture that they let you fail, and it's okay. You're supposed to fail. If it didn't fail, it wasn't a successful experiment in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The outcome of failure is equally held as a success as something that happened that you thought would happen, right? You proved yourself right. Proving yourself wrong in science is also acceptable. And we have to get to that point in society where failure is acceptable,
Mm.
where trying something new and it didn't work is not made fun of or shunned or pushed aside, but rather brought up and praised and held as like some of the highest achievements we could achieve could be our failures. It would be insane to switch the script up and go into that. So that's what I believe, creating a laboratory is for, is to give yourself a safe space. And that can be just a psychological safe space, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to give yourself an environment where you can mess up,
Mm.
where you can try something new and you can fail.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can walk away with more data, though, more information. That's feedback that is useful.
And the lab, I think, changes the mindset for people. The mindset, the growth mindset of being, it's okay to have things not be in a box, and it's okay to fail, and it's okay to think of something in a different way than you have before, just because growth mindset being because something happened this way this one time, it's going to always, happen these ways the other times. We can experience so many more ways of thinking and then outcomes, really, if we literally just open our mind up to the idea that those are possible.
Mm, yes, and I'm happy you brought up the growth mindset because that is where it's at. It's no matter what happens, I'm here to grow, I'm here to learn, and I'll do better next time. So, a lot of people think we have fixed traits, fixed genetics, fixed minds, but that is not what science found with neuroplasticity at all. And that's truly what we're after here is more neuroplasticity. We want baby brains. We want we want to be neurological sponges to the world around us and not just judge it all the time
Yeah.
and really to open back up to childlike wonder
Yeah. And we know, psychologically speaking, that growth mindset is so important to experiencing change and
and
create
flow.
and flow. Yeah. And creating lasting change and flow in your life, lasting change, the ability to know that you don't have to be stuck. We are such capable creatures.
Mm,
And there's so much for us to explore and play with together and collaborate with, really collaborate on sharing our ideas, sharing our knowledge. We're in this beautiful time where there's so much information accessible to each of us, and each of us is able to connect with people that maybe we wouldn't have been able to connect with, 50, definitely not 100 years ago, across the world, spread out all over the planet. But we're in this really unique time where we're really sharing our knowledge and our voices and our energy with one another in a way we've never have before.
hmm And really, that's the invitation of what we're here doing is to invite more people to come and share and collaborate and be part of the discussions and participate equally and not just, take a seat on the sidelines, but get in the game. Get your hands dirty, experiment, run your own experiments, and share your results. That's what we're after here. And so, yeah, this is our best attempt at setting up a beautiful stage for ourselves and for others to join the discussion and keep it going. And so we really want to invite everybody to come and join, and whether that's just online or maybe you want to actually come to one of our events, all of that you are welcome to. We want to hear from you. We want to understand where you're coming from. We want to get to know your flow style, your flow formula, and we want to grow together.
Absolutely. Collaborate is kind of where this collab piece came from, is the collaboration. And it's really evolved into conscious optimization, creative expression, and play. And so exciting.
Very exciting. We're beyond thrilled to be doing this
Yeah.
and really inviting you guys along for the ride. So stay tuned for more. Until next time, my friends.
Ciao.